From the food we eat, the air we breathe, the land we dwell, to the health of our body and mind and the well-being of all things in the universe. Unlock the science with Chula Radio Plus.
Welcome to Unlock the Science. I'm Virada Salim. When talking about nuclear, what comes to your mind? Many people might think of Chernobyl disaster in 1986 or the Hiroshima and Nagasaki incident when the United States detonated 2 atomic bombs at the 2 cities in 1945 during the Second World War. It can be seen that the notion of nuclear power is often associated with the widespread destruction, radioactive fallout, and violence inflicted upon those who are affected by it. As it was self-evident in the past, a single nuclear bomb could kill millions of people over a large city. Owing to the past nuclear incidents, many are against not only nuclear weapons, but also nuclear energy, as they share some similarities, including similar technologies and radiological research and development. However, due to the dire needs to limit carbon emissions and tackle climate issues, many are turning to nuclear as an alternative source of energy that would help both public and private sectors to achieve the climate goals. Various governments and institutions are now considering nuclear more than ever. According to the Vienna-based International Atomic Energy Agency, an international organization that seeks to promote the peaceful use of nuclear energy is an energy stemming from an atomic core made up of protons and neutrons. There are 2 ways to produce nuclear energy: nuclear fission and nuclear fusion. Nuclear fission is when the nucleus of an atom splits into several parts, whereas nuclear fusion is when the nuclei fuse together. These processes generate heat to produce steam, which can be converted into electricity. Up until now, all nuclear energy we use in our world today is produced through nuclear fission, as nuclear fusion is still in the research and development stage. The radioactive materials used in making nuclear are usually a special type of uranium, a resource as abundant as tin metal, commonly found in natural crustal rock, and plutonium. Nuclear power providers need to mine these materials underground, purify and enrich them. Afterwards, they process uranium into the form of pellets. When grouping these fuel pellets together, they become fuel rods. Fuel rods then form into a fuel assembly, and many assemblies generate electricity. Seeing the importance of phasing out fossil fuels, many researchers and nuclear advocates suggest we consider nuclear as a promising alternative for the low-carbon future as it emits less carbon. While burning fossil fuels releases greenhouse gases, electricity generation by nuclear fission does not directly produce carbon dioxide. In fact, energy generation by nuclear fission is almost 8,000 times more efficient than that by fossil fuels. This means the amount of fuel required to produce nuclear energy is way less than its counterpart. The London-based World Nuclear Association, an international organization that promotes nuclear power and supports the companies that comprise the global nuclear industry, also states that depleted nuclear fuel can be recycled and reprocessed to make derivative fuel in generating more electrical power. Consequently, if a nuclear power plant is operated in a safe manner, it will strengthen energy security as well as help countries curb carbon emissions. While it is true that nuclear energy is very expensive in the short run due to its complexity and highly strict regulatory compliance, the International Atomic Energy Agency argues that it is cost-effective in the long run compared to other sources of energy such as natural gas. Moreover, nuclear power plants are considered baseload sources of electricity, meaning they provide constant energy. While its capital cost is high, it can supply a large amount of baseload electricity in the long run at a low operating cost compared to natural gas. As of mid-2022, There are 440 active nuclear power reactors in over 50 countries, supplying 10% of the world's electricity, according to the World Nuclear Association. The top countries with the highest operational nuclear power capacity are the United States, France, China, Japan, and Russia. On the other hand, there is no operating nuclear power plant in Southeast Asia. According to the International Atomic Energy Agency, Thailand used to consider building nuclear power plants in its power development plan in 1966, but the project was later halted due to its high risks and public unacceptance. Up next, Unlock the Science reporter Pattanan Arun Prichawat talks to Associate Professor Dr. Sunchai Nilsuwankosit, a nuclear engineer at Faculty of Engineering, Chulalongkorn University, on nuclear power and its advantages.
Nuclear. How is nuclear energy created?
Okay, according to the history, people start wondering about the structure of material. We consider the first thing is in the past we talk about how the material is composed of so many elements. After we learn about physics and a lot of stuff, we come closer to the concept of atoms. Okay. In the past, we talk about atoms as being the smallest part of material. Okay. Sooner we learn more about the structure of atom that composed of nucleus and electron. And now when you say what is nuclear, then we are talking about the nucleus, which actually is the major part of element that we know. Nucleus is composed of neutrons and protons, which each are the basic particles that compose all the elements that we know of. And when we say what is nuclear, then we talk about the structure of the nucleus. That is the major part of atom that being things that contain all the mass, contain all the energy inside the atom. Fusion is the process that convert energy by combining particles together. By combining particles together, we lost some mass, and that lost mass becomes the energy. On the other hand, we can split the nucleus, the heavy nucleus, into smaller nucleus. One nucleus split into two nuclei. Okay, and with that again, we lost some mass, and that mass convert into energy. This is the process called fission. We know about fusion long before the process of fission, but we try to imitate the process, and the one that we accomplish first is the process of fission. I believe it was sometime between 1940 where Otto Hahn observed the splitting of the uranium nucleus, and that is the fission process. Discovery, people start trying to generate power from this process, and its first use was as a weapon. Okay, we know about the nuclear bomb. At the time, it was called atomic bomb. Okay, because we thought that was the process from splitting atom. Turned out we split the nucleus, not the atom. After the World War II, where we have the first usage of nuclear power as in the form of atomic bomb or nuclear bomb, we began trying to implement the nuclear fission process in the form of peaceful use to generate power, and that becomes the concept of nuclear power plant that we know nowadays. I hope that explains something about the nuclear fission process.
So are there financial incentives for adopting nuclear energy?
Well, of course, if we talk about the big picture, as I said, nuclear energy give you the very high density of power. That means one small unit produce a lot of energy that you can use for the whole country. Okay. Nowadays the size of the nuclear power plant. Well, we are talking about fission, right? Because fusion is still sometime in the future. So for fission, one unit can produce something like 1,000 megawatt electricity. That is enough for the whole province. Let's say for Bangkok.
Yeah.
Okay. One unit is enough for Bangkok, but then again, because of its high density of energy, that means you don't need so many plants to support one community. At the same time, you don't use as much energy source. Okay, for example, for nuclear power plant, each year you use about, let's say you spend about 30 few bundles. Each one is about 2 or 3 tons. Let's say about less than 100 tons of uranium fuel. Okay, and it would cost something like each bundle would cost something like let's see, 4 or 5 million US dollar. And if you use about 100 tons, that would be something like let's say 1 billion US dollar. I think that number is correct. Okay, it will sound a very large amount of money, but compared with the fuel you use for every day from gas or from coal, this is just a fraction of the cost you spend for the coal plant or gas plant. Yeah. Of course, the cost of the fuel is not as big for nuclear power, but the big problem is the investment cost, because the plant itself costs a lot and take long time to finish. In general, we expect that you take about 10 years to finish one plant, and because the cost is very big, and you have to invest it for 10 years before you get the profit, and that is the big investment, the big risk in the term of financial investment. And so that is the big hurdle for implementing the nuclear power.
So what are the advantages of nuclear energy?
Well, nowadays, the main advantage is to provide electricity, right? But nowadays, we can also use the heat that in the past would just, throw away to the environment, okay? Because in the process of this kind of thermal plant, you produce a lot of heat that would have to be transferred to the environment, because this heat cannot be used to produce electricity. It's still hot, but not hot enough to use to generate electricity. But nowadays, it turns out that quite a lot of industry that need the heat itself for their process. Okay, so that means nowadays we are talking about not only use the nuclear power to generate electricity, we also the heat left from such process can be also feed to other industry. In the past, the hot water, the steam produced from not only the nuclear plant but from other thermal plant also be used for a lot of industry, like the food industry, where you need heat to dry or accelerate the process of such kind of industry. Of course, we can use heat from the nuclear process for this purpose also. There is also the project about what we call desalination. Okay, desalination, that means we produce fresh water from seawater, okay, by using heat from this type of process. They will even talk about produce the nuclear plant, that the aim is not to produce the electricity, but to produce for this desalination process itself. For that purpose only. And in the country that need a lot of fresh water, that would be the benefit, direct benefit to such area. And I think in a way, perhaps that can be applied also. That would be something to think about.
How does nuclear play a role in mitigating climate change?
In generating the power, there is no combustion, there is no burning of anything. Okay, so in a way, the process does not produce what we call the greenhouse gas, any gas that give out the pollution. Okay, so that would be the best thing coming out of the using of the nuclear power. Of course, people will say that, well, in the process of getting the fuel, there is the mining the uranium. That process also produce the carbon dioxide and a lot of other pollution. I would say that this is about the same with any thing that do the mining. And also even for solar cell, you need to produce silicon for in such process. You also produce all these greenhouse gas and stuff. I would say the whole nuclear cycle produce a less fraction of these greenhouse gas compared with other technology. Of course, people also think about the radioactive result from such process, especially what we call radioactive waste. In general, if there is no problem, all these waste would be in the form of solid material. Okay, so main thing is the fuel bundle that we feed into the reactor is in the solid form, is in the form of some kind of steel or metal case, and all the fuel is inside that case. So that means, in general, there should not be any leakage of radioactive material from such fuel.
What are the possibilities that Thailand will have nuclear power?
Oh, okay. This is a kind of difficult question. Not difficult, not in the term of technology, but in the term of public acceptance. The nuclear program in Thailand initially began in 1970, and now it's 50 years already, and it never go anywhere.
That is Unlock the Science reporter Pathanan Arun Prichawat talking to Associate Professor Dr. Sunchai Nilsuwankosit of Faculty of Engineering, Chulalongkorn University. We will take a short break now.
You are listening to Unlock the Science on Chula Radio Plus.
Although there are many advantages of nuclear energy, this technology poses threats in terms of social, environmental, and ecological aspects. First, despite being a low-carbon energy source, the fuel required to make nuclear energy is not completely clean. Its materials, byproducts, and waste are radioactive. If not managed or disposed of properly, they could emit radioactive particles which are potentially harmful to the environment and humans. Those who are exposed to these radioactive materials are at risk of getting burned, cancer, blood disease, bone decay, and even radiation poisoning. Exposures to radioactive materials can occur in various settings, such as during nuclear testing, the fallout of nuclear power, nuclear waste disposal, and the explosion of nuclear power plants. Studies reveal that thyroid cancer is one of the most distinct consequences of nuclear. Moreover, although there are extensive safety measures in place, any accident can happen anytime, as it had many times in the past. For example, the Chernobyl disaster in Ukraine in 1986, when reactor number 4 at the power plant exploded, releasing large amounts of radioactive materials into the atmosphere and killing dozens of people. Kate Brown, a science historian at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, or MIT, and the author of Manual for Survival, A Chernobyl Guide to the Future, a book unveiling the real consequences of the Chernobyl incident based on a decade of archival and on-the-ground research, has suggested that there are far more injuries with much more hazardous consequences than what had been reported. Brown said that high elevated levels of cesium-137, a radioactive isotope of the element cesium, were found in many patients from the Chernobyl incident. Exposure to large amounts of cesium-137 can cause burns, acute radiation sickness, and even death. Although the Chernobyl accidents happened 36 years ago, Brown noted that the cesium-137 still remains in the Chernobyl zone and would disappear only between 180 and 320 years after the accident. This means the area around Chernobyl power plant is still radioactive now as it was then. Not only that radioactive substances were released into the air, but forests, agricultural products, food, and water were all contaminated and radioactive. This not only affected Ukraine's territory, but also spread into neighboring Russia and Belarus. During the time of Chernobyl accident, Ukraine was still part of then the Soviet Union. Even now, with the existing nuclear power plants, there is no long-term storage solution for radioactive waste and no method to inactivate radiation. Radioactive waste may refer to used fuels or any materials that have been exposed to radioactive dust. Therefore, the majority of radioactive waste is kept at the nuclear power plants, while high-level waste is kept in deep geological disposal. Still, after being buried, the waste containers can experience leakages, which can contaminate the surrounding earth and underground water. It is true that radioactive waste will naturally decay over time, but it can take up to thousands of years until it presents no harm to humans and the environment. To help us understand more about the negative consequences of nuclear power plants and the lessons learned, Unlock the Science reporter Pathanan Arunprichawat talks to Professor Kate Brown, who specializes in history of science at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, or MIT, in the United States.
Is nuclear energy considered clean, environmentally friendly energy?
No, it's not. People even think that it doesn't have a carbon footprint, but indeed it does, of course. But the more serious problems is that after you produce nuclear energy, you produce a great amount of nuclear waste. And nobody really knows what to do with that nuclear waste. The United States invented nuclear weapons and created the first nuclear reactors, but yet we still do not have a place to put nuclear waste. So the long you can, adopt, like we did in the 1960s and 70s, nuclear power reactors. Now those power reactors have been decommissioned, they've been put to bed, but that nuclear waste is still sitting in those communities, and those people are just as worried as they've ever been about some kind of accident.
Are there any consequences of relying on nuclear energy?
Yeah, there are long-term consequences. If you have an accident and it releases radioactive contaminants, like in Chernobyl, Fukushima, 3 Mile Island, United States, you then have people who've been contaminated by radioactive isotopes that causes cancers, birth defects, autoimmune disorders, and cardiac problems. You also have territory that has to be put out of commission, like in the Chernobyl zone, like the area around Fukushima. It's very expensive. And then the other consequences you have to think about Europe right now. France has more nuclear power than anyone else in Europe. Now that they don't want to use Russian oil and gas, you would think France's reactors would kick in and produce all this energy, but they haven't, because they have all these reactors that have technical problems. It's too hot to run the reactors in the summers because they put hot water into the rivers and they would boil the fish. So with a hotter and hotter climate, nuclear power doesn't make sense. And so when it comes to the time when we need to rely on nuclear power, we've seen from the case with France that it isn't very helpful or valuable, and they're still having to go back to coal. The other thing we've noticed with the war in Ukraine is that people suddenly are using nuclear reactor plants as tools in war for a kind of nuclear terrorism. So the Russians captured 2 nuclear stations in Ukraine. They stockpiled weapons there and soldiers there, knowing the Ukrainians would not bomb those sites. They then went and dug up and released a lot of radioactive contamination that went into neighboring communities. So these are problems that are long-term problems. Once you build a plant, you live with the liability of that for 240,000 years.
And, based on your research on Chernobyl, what are the main lessons learned from the Chernobyl case or other previous nuclear incidents?
We learned that even though we were told that nuclear power plants are perfectly safe, and that's what they said in the 60s and 70s, that's what they say today, we learned that humans make mistakes and that we almost always have accidents no matter what technology we've employed. Those accidents are costly, usually not the company, but the taxpayers pay for the cleanup. And the people living nearby pay for those accidents with their health, with the future of their children, with the destruction of their communities. And so, nuclear power is one of the most expensive forms of energy right now. It's the only reason to adopt it is to cut down a carbon footprint. But even then, the liabilities do not make sense. It makes more sense to concentrate on wind and solar and energy from the tidal waves and things like that.
Yeah. And how do these past nuclear disasters still affect our world today?
Well, we're living with it now. We have rising numbers of people with thyroid cancer all over the world, but especially in the Northern Hemisphere. And in the Northern Hemisphere during the Cold War, the great nuclear powers, mostly the United States and the Soviet Union, detonated hundreds of nuclear bombs into the atmosphere. That radioactive fallout contributes to this epidemic in thyroid cancer and other cancers. So all of us live with the nuclear legacy.
And the last question, do you think that nuclear energy plays a role in mitigating climate change, like some advocates say?
We have existing nuclear power plants. We should use them safely until they wear out. But it does not make sense to build new power plants. It takes years, usually 10 to 20 years to build them. We need new clean sources of energy today and tomorrow. And we need it to be affordable so that everybody can afford them. And we need, what you have in a nuclear power plant is centralized power in the form of electricity, power in the form of money, and power in the form of politics. Solar and wind decentralize that electrical power, but also the political and economic power. Everybody can share in the profits of generating their own energy. That makes much more sense for democratic societies.
The notion of building nuclear power plants has been a controversial topic for many during the past years, as we have witnessed nuclear incidents. Many scholars and scientists have regarded nuclear power as a reliable source of energy, especially now when there is a dire need to mitigate climate changes, while various governments and institutions are now considering it more than ever, as it produces low carbon emissions compared to traditional energy sources. Nuclear power could be a carbon-free alternative to complement solar and wind energy. Unlike solar and wind, which generate energy inconsistently depending on weather conditions, nuclear power can reliably provide a high baseload of constant energy to the grid. If properly managed, nuclear power could provide the safety net for a completely carbon-free power mix. However, the concerns are about its radioactive harm and wastes, as governments still have no real plan for handling or disposing of them safely. Unlock the Science would like to thank Associate Professor Dr. Sunchai Nilsuwankosit of Faculty of Engineering, Chulalongkorn University, and Professor Kate Brown from Massachusetts Institute of Technology, or MIT, in the United States, for sharing their thoughts on nuclear power, its advantages and disadvantages. I hope you enjoy our program. You can listen to Unlock the Science on Chula Radio Plus at FM 101.5 every Saturday from 1 p.m. to 1:30 p.m. You can also listen and follow us on our website, curadio.chula.ac.th, and our Facebook page. Our show is also accessible as podcasts, including on Apple and Spotify. See you again next Saturday. Have a nice day.
Unlock the Science is edited and produced by Sinfa Dunsarawut